to order the meeting of the Ames Zoning Board of Adjustment for November 13th, 2024. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial board created by the City of Ames. The board's purpose is to decide on applications for special use permits, exceptions, and variances to the zoning ordinance, applications for conditional use permits in the floodplain, requests for reasonable accommodations because of disability, and appeals of decisions of the zoning enforcement officer. As of the board of the city, we welcome all testimony. We make our decisions based on the facts and evidence as allowed under city code and presented in open meeting. Testimony before the board must be given under oath or affirmation. If the proceedings become lengthy, we may ask that testimony be focused on new facts or evidence not already presented. We ask that you come to the microphone if you wish to speak so that your testimony will be audible and may be recorded. Before speaking, please complete an orange information card and hand to the recording secretary. When you're testifying, please address your remarks to the board. We also ask that the proceedings be orderly. The Zoning Board of Adjustment is an independent volunteer board of citizens. We are not part of the city administration. We're served in our efforts this evening by Jane Chang, Assistant City Attorney, Benjamin Campbell, City Planner, and Natalie Riegmeyer, Recording Secretary. The order of the proceedings for each application will be as follows. First, an oral statement summarizing the issues and procedural steps will be presented by the staff. Second, testimony and evidence will be presented by the applicant. Third, testimony may be heard by any members of the audience who wish to speak in support of or in opposition to the appeal. Next, the board will give the applicant and the city staff an opportunity to present concluding summaries and arguments. And finally, the board will discuss the issues and evidence and come to a decision. The first item on our agenda this evening is the approval of the minutes from the meeting of July 24th, 2024. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes? Motion by Whitehouse. Do I have a second?
I will second.
All right, second by Patton. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. All right, the minutes of the meeting for July 24th are approved. Our second item on the agenda is a public hearing on a request for an exception to the minimum requirement for two-story buildings and minimum floor area ratio for a building addition in the Downtown Service Center zoning district at 218 and 220 Main Street. Mr. Campbell.
Good evening. At the end of last year, the owners of Ames Silversmithing approached planning staff about demolishing the building directly to the east of the jewelry store and replacing it with an addition. The architects for the owners explained that because of the layout and some structural considerations, demolishing that building and replacing it with an addition made more sense for the goals of the store. At the meeting, staff explained that the DSC zoning district does require a minimum height of 2 stories and a minimum floor area ratio of 1. Historically, if you look at Main Street, most of the buildings are 2-story. And indeed, on this site, there were historically 2-story buildings at one time that were demolished. The floor area ratio is a measure of the size of the building to the lot on which it sits. So if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, an FAR of 1 would mean you have to have a minimum of 10,000 square feet. And the reason behind that, the reason behind the height is just to keep the historic look of the street. And with the minimum floor area ratio, the idea is to encourage density downtown. The current building for Ames Silversmithing dates to 1990, and the requirements for FAR and height date to 2000, when the current the zoning ordinance was substantially written then, and the current DSC zoning district was adopted with both of those provisions. The council recently created an exception process at the behest of Ames Silversmithing to allow for this process for an exception request for exceptions to the 1-story and FAR requirements. The building, as you can see there on the east, that Ames Silversmithing is proposing to demolish is very narrow. It's a little narrower at the front than it is the rear. This is the proposed facade. You can see there's a stairway that is actually leads to the second story of the adjacent building of 216. I think at one time probably that stairway probably served both 218 and 216, but as 218 no longer has a second story, it only goes up to the 216 second story. So it does widen out there. The applicants have stated that adding a second story because of the small size of the lot would be inconvenient for them, and they do not have a particular desire for it. Staff, at the time of the exception criteria in 2000, at the adoption of DSC, the zoning code update in 2000, criteria were created, which are in the addendum. Staff did review the proposed demolition and construction in line with those criteria and did find that the criteria are met. We do propose or recommend alternative one, with two conditions rather. The first condition, you can see here, what was submitted to us, the facade over the stairway to 216 is very plain, and we've discussed with the architect, and the architect is amenable to that. And that the idea there is just to put some kind of design. It could be geometric, it could be done with pattern, it could be done with glazing of brick, something. If you look at a lot of the tops of the buildings in downtown, you'll see just a very simple design. It doesn't even have to be in contrasting color or anything, just a herringbone or a basket weave, something like that, that gives it visual appeal. And then the second item is that the parking space that was submitted on the site plan be removed. New parking spaces are not allowed back there. The existing ones that are behind the jewelry store are allowed to remain. They are considered legally non-conforming. And I can answer any questions that you have. Oh, I do want to add, you received a letter from a neighbor responding to the notices that we did send out. The letter references the historic nature of 218. I also included with that letter a copy of the map for the downtown National Register Historic District. Neither 218 nor 220, so the Ames Silversmithing building and the one they're proposing to demolish, are historic resources. And so I'm not sure precisely, I don't know if the writer of the letter is possibly referring to 216, which is a contributing resource to the National Register Historic District, but neither of those buildings are considered historic.
Not if they were built in 1990.
There is a question about, I wasn't sure, the Ames Silversmithing was definitely built in 1990. The small building to the east, it's possible that it still has part of the original building there, but it has had its second story removed and the facade is completely gone and completely changed. And I went and looked back through the documentation that we compiled when we when we applied rather to have the Downtown Register Historic District, National Register Historic District created. And the analysis of that particular property found no historic merit to it.
What's the actual square footage of the lot for 218 compared to the square footage that's going to be there, or total between 220 218? How close to one is it?
Yeah, the FAR, the new FAR will be, so the criteria does require that it has at least a minimum FAR of 0.5, and this will be at approximately 0.73 with the new addition.
And 220 already was below that anyway, correct? Because it's one.
It is below 1, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions for staff? Is the area behind 218 not a parking space already? What is it? I mean,
it is not. It is kind of a grassy area that's actually sloped. Yeah, you couldn't really park a car on there.
Okay. All right. I don't believe the applicant is here or there are any other members of the public. So there aren't any other questions for staff.
I got a question, sorry. And I may have missed this. So 218 and 220, are they both one story right now, or is one a two-story?
They are both one story
Both,
right now.
okay.
And that in the criteria, in the addendum on page, so criteria 2 does talk about replacing a multi-story, or the proposed project does not replace a multi-story structure with a one-story structure. So that is part of the reason that staff supports it, is that it's just replacing a one-story with a one-story. If it were demolition of a two-story with a one-story, under the current criteria, staff could not support that.
And when were those properties last two-story properties?
I don't know exactly when they were demolished. I did go back and look through the historic Sanborn maps. So they were both two-story properties in at least 1961, which is the most recent one that we have. So sometime between then and the 90s, it changed.
I got another question. I got a lot of questions, actually.
Yeah.
Are there any other, because I think there are others, but are there any other properties in the historic district, the Main Street Historic District, that are one story besides these?
Yes, there are. Actually, just on this block, just to the west, the quilting store at the corner of Main and Kellogg is an example of a building where there was historically a two-story building. It burned down, in the 80s, maybe something like that. And then before the current code was rebuilt as a single story building. So there are, and you can see on the map there, the ones that are light gray as opposed to the dark gray, the map of the National Register Historic District. So several of those are one story.
Probably be interesting to know too, how many of the two-story or higher are actually using the upper levels as far as usable space. I mean, it's beyond the scope of this, of course, but probably they have a lot of, as old as they are, maintenance problems.
I think there's a mix. Many of them actually are rented out. There are including the Sheldon Munn, there are,
Right.
I think it was 114 rental units in the downtown area, and that includes an area larger than what you see on the historic district map.
Right.
And so some of them are used for commercial or office space. I think there's a yoga studio on one. There are a few I do know that are used for just storage or are underused, but I believe that the majority of the second stories are used.
Any more questions for staff? It's good though.
And then the property owner at Gilger Designs, that's the only person who had, I guess, an opinion.
Yeah, I did not hear, did not receive any other phone calls or receive any other emails or letters from anybody else.
Oh, one question I have is there a trend in terms of more one story? Does that make sense? Is there like a historical trend in terms of one story versus two story?
I mean, the newer, let's see. I mean, basically, most of the historic structures that are there, not all of them, like the ones at the very end of Main Street on the south side, for instance, those really short ones, those very small properties those are single story. They are also very small buildings. I think putting a second story on there, you could argue would be of limited worth. But the bigger buildings, like on the north side of the street, just across from the subject properties, are all two-story. The newer building, anything that's one story is going to be, something that was replacing a historic building that was almost certainly a two-story building at one point.
Still moving.
No more. No more
Okay.
questions.
Just double checking. All right.
Discussion?
Any motion or discussion at this point in time
I,
regarding the alternatives?
I'm torn because I don't like the idea of allowing more one-story buildings downtown, but there's no cause for in my mind, for denial. I don't know.
Well, I think it's already one story, so if it,
Yeah.
That's
and they
what I was-
improve
Yeah.
if the facade matches what's already there, it's
Yeah.
an improvement. It's not going to go back to 2-story.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So we either move forward or it still stays the same and it's not any
Ideally,
better. So
they'd make both buildings 2 stories, but that's obviously
yeah, I think the cost in that's probably prohibitive at this juncture.
right.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, what it would take to
Yeah.
put a 2-story. I don't know if the existing silversmithing building was designed for
Yeah,
a
that's
second
what I
story.
was thinking.
Probably not. It would take too
Mhm.
much to have to redo it to put a second
Mhm.
story. Because when you build, you have to plan on the second story. So,
Yep.
so yeah, and as long as the floor ratio is similar to
Yeah, it will actually be getting bigger.
bigger, right,
Mhm.
and it's better use of the space. I don't see that
Mhm.
utility of 218 being of value to anybody.
Yeah,
Um,
the current
Especially by
building,
itself.
this is showing the proposed footprint here on the map. The current building is probably, about where that 60 is on the right side there. It probably cuts off at about there, where it is.
Yeah. So if we're not really going backwards, we want to encourage development. So
Yeah.
I think that's
But yeah, I share your concern about, taking away from the historical
Right. And we want-
significance of like having 2-story, but I think,
It's already not 2 stories.
that was already made.
Yeah.
So that black rectangle is the staircase, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah,
So it's kind of 2 stories.
Yeah, it just
That
goes up
part
the
is.
side.
I mean, it's mostly, the property line, I believe cuts through that building. And so as the Ames Silversmithing, in order to add the addition, will have to be cleaning up the property lines anyway. And so I've encouraged them to maybe clean that messiness up at the same time.
Yeah, they could just sell it.
I think there's an easement across it that technically gives it access.
Okay. All right. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept or adopt alternative 1.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
All right. Any further discussion on that matter then, since we have the motion? All right. Take a roll call vote. Aye.
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 Okay, the motion is passed. Anyone wishing to appeal the decision of the zoning board of adjustment may do so by filing writ certiorari within 30 days of the filing of the variance. All right, as there is no further business before the board, I will entertain a motion to dismiss.
I move to adjourn.
All right. Oh, I always say dismiss like class instead of adjourn. Sorry. All right, I'll second that motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.